Hey, so great you're here.
MLK, The Lost Speech. It was a day like any other when Mariah Williams walked into the dusty, dimly lit storage room of the National Archives in Washington, D.C. The building, filled with the weight of history, stood like a silent sentinel of the past. But today, Mariah wasn't just here to browse through files or peruse the well-worn documents about the civil rights movement. She had a purpose, a mission that had occupied her thoughts for months. She was searching for something hidden, something long forgotten. Mariah was a civil rights journalist, and for the past several years, she had been immersed in the work of uncovering stories that didn't make the history books. She had built a career on digging through old records, uncovering lost narratives, and interviewing the people who had lived through the struggle for equality. But what she was looking for now wasn't something that had been overlooked. It was something that had been deliberately buried. The speech. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was set to deliver a speech just days before his assassination in 1968, a speech that was reportedly lost to time. It was said to be one of his most powerful addresses, one that could have changed the course of history. The rumors surrounding the speech were persistent. Some said it was so controversial that it posed a direct threat to the powers that be. Others speculated it revealed new, startling truths about the political landscape of the time. Truths that could have shed light on why King was killed. The speech was said to be buried somewhere within the labyrinth of the National Archives, tucked away among thousands of pages of documents, recordings, and memorabilia that had been collected over the years. Mariah had caught wind of its existence through an old lead, a former FBI agent who claimed to have seen the original transcript years ago, but never made it public. The agent had been tight-lipped, but not enough to keep the truth from seeping through the cracks. Now, Mariah was on a mission to find it. She sifted through endless boxes of files, flipping through page after page of correspondence, legal documents, and transcripts. Most of the papers were standard, nothing of real interest. But Mariah was persistent, her fingers never slowing, her mind focused. She knew the speech had to be here somewhere. Hours passed, and Mariah's frustration was starting to show. She had scoured the room, leafing through stacks of paper, when she noticed a file that seemed slightly out of place. It was labeled simply, MLK, Unreleased Speech, April 1968. Her heart skipped a beat. Could it be? With trembling hands, she pulled the file from the shelf and opened it. Inside was a stack of yellowing pages, each one covered in Dr. King's distinctive handwriting. The words leapt off the page, as if they were alive, calling out from the past. The speech was real. Mariah began to read, her eyes scanning the words that had been hidden for so long. As she delved deeper into the text, she could feel the weight of the moment. This was the speech that Dr. King had been preparing to deliver in the final days of his life. And from the words on the page, it was clear that this wasn't just any speech. This was something extraordinary, something far more radical than anything he had said before. It spoke of economic justice, the need for reparations for African Americans, and a call for an even more profound shift in the way the country viewed race and class. Dr. King was no longer simply asking for equality under the law. He was demanding a complete rethinking of the American system itself. Mariah's heart raced as she read. She had stumbled upon something that could change everything. This wasn't just a lost speech. It was a document that could expose the true motivations behind Dr. King's assassination. But then a sinking feeling hit her. She couldn't just publish this. If she did, it would bring consequences far beyond her career. The forces that had silenced King had likely been working to suppress this speech for a reason. They might not have been able to stop him from writing it, but they had succeeded in keeping it out of the public eye for decades. Mariah took a deep breath. She had to do this. The world needed to know the truth. But as she stood in that dusty room, clutching the speech in her hands, she realized the danger she was in. This discovery could ruin her career. It could make her a target. And yet, if she stayed silent, the truth would remain buried forever. Days passed as Mariah wrestled with her decision. She reached out to a few trusted colleagues, journalists who had spent their careers fighting for truth in the face of adversity. One of them, an older reporter named Samuel Green, had worked with Dr. King during the 1960s and had been an outspoken advocate for civil rights. She met him at a small coffee shop in downtown D.C. to discuss the discovery. "I've read through it, Sam," Mariah said, her voice low. "I've read every word. And I'm telling you, This speech, it's everything. It's what he was going to say before they killed him. Samuel leaned in, his brow furrowing as he listened. He had lived through the civil rights movement, seen the fire of revolution burn brightly in the hearts of the people. But even he couldn't have prepared himself for what Mariah was describing. I always knew there was more to it, Samuel said quietly. There had to be. They didn't just kill him because of the marches or the speeches. They killed him because he was starting to shake the foundations of this entire system. Mariah nodded. This speech, he was calling for a revolution. Not just a revolution of civil rights, but a revolution of the entire economic and political structure. He was talking about reparations, about dismantling the capitalist system that keeps the poor and the oppressed down. Samuel looked at her, his eyes hardening. You know what that means, don't you? You're holding a piece of history that could blow everything wide open. And if you release it, well, you'll be a target. Just like King. Mariah's stomach churned. She had suspected as much, but hearing it out loud made it all the more real. I know, she said, but I can't let it stay hidden. The truth has to come out. Samuel looked at her for a long moment, his gaze weighing her decision. Finally, he spoke. Just be careful. You don't know what kind of forces you're messing with. You might think this is about the truth, but it's bigger than that. This is about power, and they don't like losing control. Mariah nodded. She knew the stakes, but she also knew that sometimes truth was worth the risk. That night, Mariah sat at her desk, the speech in front of her. The room was quiet, save for the faint hum of the city outside. She had been working for hours, transcribing the speech, preparing it for publication. But she knew that even once she had it out there, it wouldn't be enough. The forces that had kept it hidden for so long would stop at nothing to make sure it was buried again. But Mariah had no choice. She couldn't live with herself if she didn't do everything in her power to bring the truth to light. And as the night stretched on, the weight of her decision settled in. The speech was just the beginning. The real battle had yet to come. Mariah's hands trembled as she hit send on the email. The transcript was out there now, sent to a few trusted outlets, journalists who had been vocal in their fight for social justice. The decision had been made. The speech, a call for economic justice and radical transformation, was no longer a secret confined to the dusty shelves of the National Archives. For a moment, Mariah sat back in her chair, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over her. She had done it. The truth was now in the world's hands. But even as she leaned back, there was a gnawing unease. The weight of history was not the only weight she would have to carry. She knew the storm would be swift, and she knew it would be fierce. Within hours, Mariah's phone began to ring. The first call came from a colleague at the Washington Post, a reporter who had worked alongside her on various civil rights stories in the past. Mariah, this is huge, the voice on the other end said. The speech, it's everywhere. We've already had calls from major networks wanting to cover it. It's like the world is waking up to something they never saw before. Mariah swallowed hard. The realization that the speech had found its way into the public consciousness was both exhilarating and terrifying. I'm glad it's getting out there, but you need to be careful, she said, her voice strained. This is bigger than I thought. There's a reason they buried it. People are going to come after anyone who makes noise about it. Her colleague paused, and Mariah could hear the concern in his voice. I know, and we've been hearing whispers. Some people want to sweep this under the rug. You've opened a can of worms, Mariah, but you did the right thing. We'll stand by you, all of us. Mariah hung up the phone and stared at the screen of her computer, where news outlets began running headlines. Lost MLK speech discovered. Radical call for economic revolution unearthed. The final speech of MLK, a vision for radical change. As the news spread like wildfire, Mariah felt a growing sense of unease. She hadn't anticipated how quickly the political establishment would respond. Even before the first full day of coverage was over, she received an anonymous email warning her to stop pursuing the story. You don't know what you've unleashed. If you continue, you'll regret it. For your own sake, you should let this go. It was unsigned, but the message was clear. The forces that had orchestrated King's assassination and likely covered up the circumstances surrounding it were watching her every move. Mariah deleted the email, but the chill that ran down her spine told her that this was only the beginning. The next morning, Mariah received an unexpected visitor. The knock on her door was soft but deliberate, and when she opened it, she found a man in his early 40s, dressed in a dark suit. He looked every bit the part of an establishment fixer, calm, professional, but with an edge of authority that made her immediately wary. "Mariah Williams?" he asked, his voice smooth and collected. She nodded, her instincts on high alert. "I'm Agent Reynolds, FBI," he said, flashing a badge. "We need to talk." Mariah's heart skipped a beat. The FBI? She hadn't done anything illegal, had she? She stepped aside, allowing him into her apartment, though her mind was already racing with questions. Reynolds surveyed her small living room, taking in the bookshelves and the scattered papers before turning his gaze back to her. "I'm sure you're aware of the speech you've released. It's been causing quite a stir." Mariah nodded, her throat dry. "I'm aware." "Listen," Reynolds said, leaning in slightly. "I'm not here to intimidate you. I'm here to be very clear. You're treading dangerous waters. That speech, it wasn't just a lost document. It's part of something much bigger. And the people you're about to stir up, they won't take kindly to this coming to light. In fact, they'll do whatever it takes to make sure it's buried again." Mariah's pulse quickened. "Are you threatening me?" "No," Reynolds said, his voice calm. "I'm warning you. You don't want to be in the way of forces that have been in play for decades. You're dealing with more than just history. You're dealing with the people who made sure certain pieces of history were never seen again." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and foreboding. Mariah swallowed, her resolve strengthening. "And what? You're here to stop me from telling the truth." Reynolds gave a small, almost pitying smile. "I'm not here to stop you, Mariah. You've already done that part. But think about what you're risking. You're not just exposing corruption. You're exposing the lies that hold this country together. And once the lies start crumbling, the chaos that follows will be bigger than anything you've imagined." "Maybe the chaos is exactly what we need," Mariah shot back, her voice growing more defiant. Reynolds didn't flinch. "I'm just here to give you a choice. You can keep going down this road and face the consequences. Or you can stop now, before it's too late. Because once you're in this, there's no going back." Mariah stared at him for a long moment, weighing his words. But in the end, she knew that she couldn't stop now. The truth was out there. It was bigger than her, bigger than anything she had ever worked for. "Thank you for the warning," she said coldly. "But I'm not going to back down." Reynolds didn't say another word. He simply turned, walked out the door, and left Mariah standing there, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the room. As the days went on, the pressure on Mariah only grew. The mainstream media outlets, once eager to cover the speech, began to shift their tone. Some reporters started questioning the authenticity of the speech, suggesting that it might have been fabricated or manipulated. Others began to hint at the potential danger of giving voice to such radical ideas. The narrative was shifting. Mariah knew what was happening. They were trying to discredit her. The media, which had once celebrated her as a rising star in civil rights journalism, was now trying to paint her as a reckless conspiracy theorist. The FBI had made its position clear, but it wasn't just them. Politicians, corporations, and other powerful groups were aligning against her, eager to silence the truth. But Mariah couldn't back down. She had come too far, and the more she learned about the speech, the more certain she became that it wasn't just about Dr. King's vision. It was about the history of America itself. A history that had been buried, twisted, and rewritten to serve the powerful. As Mariah sat in her small office, looking out at the city skyline, she knew that the battle was far from over. The speech was just the beginning. The forces that had killed Dr. King were still active, still entrenched, and now they were coming for her. But Mariah was ready. She wasn't going to stop until the truth came out. She owed it to Dr. King, to his legacy, and to the millions of people who had fought and died for justice. No matter the cost. The pressure began to mount on Mariah in ways she hadn't anticipated. The phone calls, once sporadic, became a constant hum of threats, warnings, and manipulations. At first, they were anonymous. But as the days stretched on, they became more personal. A voice on the other end, familiar but distorted, would say things like, "You don't know who you're messing with," or "You're not ready for what's coming." The first physical sign of intimidation came when Mariah arrived at her apartment one evening to find the front door ajar. It wasn't locked. She had locked it that morning, and it was late, nearly 10 p.m., when she returned. Her heart began to pound as she pushed the door open further, stepping cautiously inside. Everything looked normal. Her furniture, her bookshelves, her kitchen, all untouched. But then, she noticed something. A single sheet of paper, folded neatly, was resting on her coffee table. Her name was written on it in bold, unsteady handwriting. You are playing a dangerous game, Mariah. The truth is a weapon, but it's also a curse. Don't say we didn't warn you. She dropped the note as if it had burned her fingers. The air felt thicker suddenly, like the walls of her apartment were closing in on her. She knew what it meant. Whoever had sent it had been inside her apartment. Whoever had sent it was watching her. She immediately called Samuel Green, hoping for some kind of reassurance, but the phone rang and rang. When it finally connected, his voice was low and urgent. Mariah, listen to me. I've been talking to some of the people who were close to Dr. King's circle. There are others out there who know what you found. They've been monitoring this closely, and I'm telling you now, they're coming for you. I can handle myself, Sam, she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. But I need your help. They're trying to discredit me, and they're turning up the heat. I need to get the full transcript into the hands of someone who can back it up. Don't send anything more to the press. Not yet. I'll get in touch with a few people who can verify it. I've got connections, trust me. But for now, lay low. Just lay low until I say it's safe. Mariah hesitated. You don't think they're going to let this go? They've been burying the truth for decades. They won't. But we can't give them any more ammunition. Not until we know what we're up against. She hung up the phone, her mind racing. The walls seemed to press closer with every passing moment. The quiet of her apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt suffocating. The next day, as Mariah was preparing her story for another round of interviews, she received an unexpected visitor. It was a man who appeared to be in his early 50s, wearing a dark gray suit and glasses that framed his stern face. His manner was polite, but there was an edge to him, something almost mechanical in the way he held himself. I'm here to speak with Mariah Williams, he said, his voice smooth but authoritative. She frowned, instinctively stepping back from the door. Who are you? My name is Carl Stevens, he replied. I represent a group of individuals concerned with the implications of the recent revelations regarding Dr. King's speech. We've come to discuss how we can help you, Ms. Williams. Mariah didn't trust him. The tone in his voice, the strange formality of it all, made her skin crawl. Help me, she asked, her voice sharp. You mean shut me down? He smiled thinly. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. We simply want to discuss the best way forward. Your publication of the speech is problematic for many people, both in the public and private sectors. But we can offer you a way to avoid unnecessary conflict if you're willing to cooperate. Mariah crossed her arms, standing firm. Cooperate with who? What exactly is it that you're offering? Carl's gaze remained steady, though there was a flicker of impatience behind his eyes. Let's say we can offer you protection, Ms. Williams. Protection from the consequences of your actions. No one needs to be harmed, and the speech can still reach the public in a more appropriate manner. I'm not interested in your protection, she snapped. And I don't care what you think is appropriate. The truth is out, and it's not going back in. Carl's smile faltered, his demeanor stiffening. He took a step forward, his presence suddenly more imposing. You misunderstand. This isn't a matter of truth, Ms. Williams. This is a matter of control. And if you persist, if you continue this path, you will find that control is a far more dangerous thing than you realize. Mariah held her ground. You can't control me. You can't stop this truth. You'll only make it more dangerous for yourselves. Carl stepped back, his face unreadable. We'll see how long that bravado lasts. You can't fight power, Ms. Williams. Not for long. With that, he turned and walked out, leaving Mariah standing in the doorway, shaken but resolute. She had been right all along. There was no going back. The next few weeks were a blur of growing tension and threats. The media began to turn against her, with stories claiming that the speech was nothing more than a fabrication, a hoax meant to cause division. But Mariah knew better. She knew the speech had come from King himself, and it was precisely that truth that the powers that be were trying to suppress. Despite the mounting pressure, she refused to back down. She kept pushing forward, working with Samuel and a small group of trusted journalists who had agreed to help her. They were beginning to piece together the larger narrative. The way King's final speech had been seen as a direct challenge to the establishment, one that called for a radical overhaul of American society. It was becoming clear that the government's role in King's assassination was far more complicated than anyone had known. They hadn't just killed him because of his dream of equality. They had killed him because of his vision for a radically transformed society. As the investigation deepened, Mariah began to understand just how deep the conspiracy went. There were whispers of covert meetings, of backroom deals, of forces within the FBI, CIA, and even within the White House that had actively worked to neutralize King's influence. They had feared the rise of a new movement, one that could unify the poor, the marginalized, and the oppressed, regardless of race. Mariah wasn't just exposing the murder of a man who had fought for justice. She was exposing the systemic forces that had tried, and failed, to bury the idea that true equality could only be achieved by dismantling the very systems of power that had oppressed the people for centuries. But with each revelation, Mariah knew the stakes were growing higher. She was being watched. She was being followed. And the more she uncovered, the closer she came to the point of no return. One late evening, as she was finishing up a draft for her next article, Mariah received a phone call that chilled her to the bone. It was Samuel's voice on the other end, but there was something off about it, something urgent and strained. "Mariah, listen to me carefully. They know where you are. They know what you're doing. It's time to disappear." Mariah froze. "What do you mean? What's going on?" "They've made their move, Mariah. You need to get out of DC now. Don't tell anyone. Don't pack. Just go. I'm sending you an address. Get there. Now." Before she could respond, the line went dead. She grabbed her bag and rushed out of the apartment, the weight of everything she had uncovered crashing down on her as she stepped into the night. The game had changed, and now it wasn't just the truth that was at stake, it was her life. Mariah's heart hammered in her chest as she sped through the darkened streets of DC. She barely remembered grabbing her bag and leaving the apartment. Her mind was racing too fast, her thoughts tangled with the weight of Samuel's warning. They knew where she was. They knew what she had. The thought of being pursued by the very forces she had been uncovering sent a chill through her body, but there was no time to waste. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Samuel, a short, cryptic message. "Head to 14th Street, don't stop. Don't answer anyone. Not even me." Mariah gripped the steering wheel tightly as she navigated through the familiar streets, her mind filled with the grim reality that had just hit home. She was in too deep now. No one who had ever dared to expose the full extent of what happened to Dr. King had walked away unscathed. No one. She followed Samuel's instructions, her eyes darting to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights tailing her. There was no sign of any pursuit yet, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, was watching her every move. The city was eerily quiet as she turned down a narrow alley off 14th Street, parking behind an old, nondescript building. She grabbed her bag and quickly checked the area. No one in sight, but the silence only heightened her sense of danger. Before she could make another move, her phone buzzed again, this time a call from an unknown number. For a brief second, her instincts screamed at her to ignore it, but curiosity got the better of her. She answered. "Mariah," a voice said, cold and clipped. "You're a brave woman. A foolish one, but brave." She froze. The voice sounded like it belonged to someone she'd never spoken to before, but the icy tone sent a chill down her spine. She didn't recognize it, but she knew that whoever was on the other end was someone who had a vested interest in keeping her quiet. "You're making a mistake," the voice continued. "We've been patient with you, but you've crossed a line. The moment you released that speech, you sealed your fate. The forces you're dealing with? They will stop at nothing to make sure the truth stays buried." Mariah's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. "I didn't release that speech for you. I released it for the truth, and I'm not backing down." A low, humorless laugh echoed through the phone. "You'll regret that decision. We have people and places you can't even imagine. People who can erase you without a second thought." The line went dead. Mariah stood frozen for a moment, the phone still pressed to her ear. The weight of the threat hung over her like a dark cloud. She shoved the phone into her pocket and looked around once more. The empty street, the dimly lit buildings, everything felt wrong. She needed to keep moving. The address Samuel had sent her to was supposed to be a safe house, but as she started walking toward the entrance of the building, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking straight into a trap. Inside the building, the atmosphere was far from welcoming. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows on the cracked walls. It smelled of mildew and dust, the kind of place that had been forgotten by the world. At the far end of the narrow hallway, a door was slightly ajar. Mariah hesitated before pushing it open. Inside, a figure sat at a cluttered desk, his back to her. The air was thick with tension. Samuel Green. He didn't turn around immediately. For a moment, all Mariah could hear was the sound of his breathing. Then, as if sensing her presence, Samuel swiveled in his chair, his eyes locking with hers. "You made it," he said, his voice low. "But you're not safe yet." Mariah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She took a seat opposite him, her eyes scanning the room. It was sparse, save for the scattered papers and old files piled high on the desk. Everything about the space screamed urgency, like it had been put together in a hurry. "Did you hear from them?" Samuel asked, his voice tight with concern. "Yeah," she replied, pulling out the note she'd received earlier. She dropped it onto the desk. "It's starting." Samuel's eyes flicked to the paper, his face hardening as he read. "They're not messing around. They're going to come after you, and they won't stop until you're either silenced or dead." Mariah's pulse quickened. "What do I do now? I can't just disappear, Samuel. This is bigger than me. The world has to know what's in that speech." "I know," he said, running a hand through his hair. "But this isn't just about exposing the truth. It's about survival. The people behind all of this, the ones who made sure that speech never saw the light of day, they've got resources, influence, and they're not going to let you get away with it." "Then we fight," Mariah said, her voice firm, even though her mind was racing. "We get the rest of the transcripts out. We go public." Samuel shook his head. "It's not that simple. If you go public with everything, you're signing your death warrant. You have to be strategic." Mariah stood up, pacing the room. "I can't keep hiding. They already know everything. And even if I disappear, the truth won't stay buried forever. People have to know what they did to King. People have to know what he was about to say." Samuel sighed heavily. "I'm not saying you're wrong, but you're putting a lot of people at risk. There's a reason they want you gone. That speech is more dangerous than you think. It's not just the message. It's the people who will do anything to stop it from being heard. And right now, you're the only one who can get it into the right hands." Mariah's gaze met Samuel's. "Then we make sure it gets out. We make sure they can't stop us." Samuel stood up slowly, his expression darkening. "This isn't a game, Mariah. If we do this, there's no turning back. But if you're ready for the fight, then we'll need allies. Powerful ones." Mariah nodded, her resolve hardening. "I'm ready. I've been ready for this fight my whole life." The next few hours were a blur of planning, phone calls, and preparing for what was to come. They would need to make sure the speech was seen by as many people as possible, bypassing the media outlets that had already been compromised. They would need to reach the people, those who still believed in the ideals Dr. King had fought for. As dawn broke over the horizon, Mariah stood by the window of the safe house, staring out at the city she knew so well. But now, it felt like a foreign place, full of threats and shadows. She wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was certain. She couldn't back down now. The truth had been hidden for far too long, and now it was time for it to come to light. The safe house, once a place of refuge, now felt more like a prison. Mariah couldn't escape the sense of impending doom. Every phone call, every conversation, every movement outside the window made her feel like a target. Samuel had been right. There was no turning back now. She had committed herself to the fight, but the stakes were higher than ever. They were no longer just fighting for the truth. They were fighting to stay alive. The plan had been set into motion. Samuel had arranged meetings with a few trusted allies, journalists and activists who had long fought for the truth about Dr. King's legacy. People who had the means to get the speech out to the public without drawing the kind of attention that would trigger the backlash of powerful forces. But Mariah knew that even with these allies, the risk was immense. Those in power wouldn't let this slide quietly. She sat in the dimly lit room, staring at the pile of papers that held the full transcript of the lost speech. She had read it countless times by now, each time feeling the weight of its words more profoundly. Dr. King had been prepared to call for nothing less than the transformation of American society. He had been ready to confront not just racism, but the economic and social inequalities that permeated every facet of life in the country. The speech was more than a final message. It was a challenge to the entire system of power that had oppressed millions for generations. As she sifted through the documents, a knock at the door broke her concentration. She jumped, her heart racing as she instinctively moved toward the window to peer outside. But there was no one in sight. She hesitated, then slowly walked to the door, glancing through the peephole. Samuel stood there, his face grim. She opened the door quickly. "Is everything okay?" Mariah asked, her voice tight with nerves. "Not exactly," Samuel replied, stepping inside. He closed the door behind him and glanced around the room, ensuring they were alone. "We've got a problem." Mariah's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "We've been compromised," Samuel said, his eyes serious. "Someone tipped them off. The plan we had, it's already been infiltrated. They know what we're about to do." Mariah's mind raced. "What do we do now?" Samuel paced the room. "We can't just wait for them to come for us. We have to move quickly, get the speech to someone we trust, someone who can make sure it gets out. Otherwise, they'll stop us before we even get started." Mariah nodded. The urgency in Samuel's voice only solidified her resolve. There was no time to waste. Just then, her phone buzzed. A message from an encrypted app appeared on the screen. She opened it cautiously. "They know you're in danger. We're coming to you." The message wasn't signed, but Mariah knew instantly who it was from. The people Samuel had spoken of, the allies who had been working in the shadows, the ones who truly understood what was at stake. They were coming to help. "Who was that?" Samuel asked, his voice sharp. "It's them," she said, holding up the phone. "The ones I've been working with. They're coming to help us." Samuel exhaled in relief, but quickly returned to the issue at hand. "We need to move. Now. We'll meet them at the location I set up earlier. It's the only safe place we've got." Mariah grabbed her bag, stuffing the speech documents inside. She paused for a moment, taking one last look at the small, nondescript room that had been her hideout for the past few days. She wasn't sure when she would return, if she would return, but it didn't matter. What mattered now was ensuring that Dr. King's final words would be heard. The city was quieter than usual as they drove through the early morning streets, the skyline bathed in the pale light of dawn. Mariah's heart pounded in her chest, her mind reeling with the weight of everything that had led to this moment. Every shadow, every passing car, felt like a threat. When they arrived at the meeting point, a dilapidated warehouse on the outskirts of the city, Mariah felt a strange sense of relief. At least here, they were outside the reach of the prying eyes that had been watching them. She and Samuel entered cautiously, the heavy metal door creaking as it opened. Inside, the space was dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of rust and decay. It looked abandoned, but the people they had arranged to meet were already there. In the corner of the room stood two figures, both tall, their faces obscured by shadows. One of them stepped forward, his voice low but steady. "Mariah Williams?" he asked, his tone giving away nothing. She nodded, stepping forward. "That's me. You're here to help us." The man nodded, then gestured to the other figure, who pulled a thick folder from their bag and handed it to Samuel. "This is everything we've gathered," the first man said. "We've been tracking the group responsible for covering up King's final speech for years. This is the proof you need to not only get the speech out, but to expose the depth of the conspiracy." Mariah felt a surge of hope. "We can finally make it public." The second figure, who had remained silent, spoke for the first time. "The speech, yes, but there's more to it. You're not just dealing with the people who killed King. You're up against a network of people who've been suppressing voices like his for decades. You're about to uncover a web of corruption that reaches into the highest levels of government, business, and law enforcement." Mariah felt a wave of dread wash over her. "How deep does it go?" The man took a step closer, his voice low. "Deeper than you can imagine. But this," he gestured to the folder, "is how you begin to bring them down. It's all connected. The assassination, the cover-up, the continued suppression of anyone who dares challenge the system." Mariah glanced at Samuel, who looked just as troubled as she felt. "We need to get this out there," she said, her voice firm. "We will," the first man replied. "But be prepared. Once you do, there's no going back. They will come after you. They won't stop." "I've already made my choice," Mariah said, her voice resolute. "I'm not going to stop until the truth comes out." Samuel placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm. "We do this together. We expose them, no matter what it takes." Mariah nodded, taking the folder from the second figure. The weight of it in her hands felt monumental. This was not just about exposing a historical injustice. This was about dismantling the very system that had allowed such atrocities to continue unchecked for so long. Outside the warehouse, the faint sound of sirens broke the silence, a stark reminder that they were running out of time. Samuel, Mariah, and their new allies quickly moved toward the exit, but as they reached the door, a sudden noise stopped them cold. It wasn't just the sound of a car pulling up, it was the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps. "They found us," Samuel muttered. Mariah's heart dropped into her stomach as the door swung open. Figures in dark suits flooded into the room, their faces hard, their eyes cold. They weren't here to talk. They were here to stop them, by any means necessary. With no time to think, Mariah shoved the folder into Samuel's hands and turned to run. The game had changed. They weren't just fighting to expose the truth anymore. Now, they were fighting for their lives. The air was thick with tension as Mariah, Samuel, and their new allies darted through the dim corridors of the warehouse. Behind them, the sound of boots pounding against the concrete floor grew louder. They could hear the crackle of walkie-talkies, the shuffling of agents preparing to seal off their escape route. It was clear that they were not going to make it out easily, if at all. "Move," Samuel hissed, pushing Mariah forward as he glanced over his shoulder. "We have to get to the back exit." Samuel, too, was a constant presence. His face was haggard from the sleepless nights, but he never wavered in his commitment. He had once been a reporter who had covered civil rights stories, but now he was fully immersed in this fight to uncover the truth, even if it cost him everything. Mariah found strength in his determination, even as she feared what might happen next. Their final meeting took place in a rundown cafe in a corner of the city, away from prying eyes. The team had gathered to make the last adjustments before they were ready to release the speech to the world. Everyone was tense, their eyes flickering between their phones, constantly checking for any sign of movement from the people hunting them. "This is it," Samuel said quietly, looking around the table. "We're ready. It's time to put the truth out there. No more hiding." Mariah nodded, but a feeling of unease gnawed at her. This wasn't just about the speech. It was about everything that had been built to keep people like Dr. King silent. She knew that the people who had silenced him once were not going to let him speak again without a fight. A young journalist named Elena, who had been working with them for the past few days, spoke up. "We've got the plan set. The speech is going out first thing tomorrow. It's already being prepped for distribution. Once it hits the press, there's no going back." "We can't afford to be caught," Mariah said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "We need to make sure it spreads fast, everywhere. I don't care if it's the New York Times, local papers, blogs, social media. Every outlet that can take it has to publish it. We can't let them control the narrative." Samuel leaned forward, looking at Mariah. "I know. I'm just saying, once it's out, we're in the spotlight. They're going to come for us. The pressure will be intense. We'll need to be ready." Mariah's eyes scanned the table, locking with those of each person present. They all nodded in agreement. No one was backing down now, not after everything they had been through. The truth was coming, whether the world was ready for it or not. And so it began. The following morning, the first article hit the web. Mariah watched from a secure location as the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s final, unreleased speech began to spread across the internet like wildfire. It was a slow trickle at first, just a few scattered tweets, some minor news outlets picking up the story. But within hours, it was everywhere. Social media exploded. People were in shock. The words Dr. King had been ready to deliver to the world, his call for justice, for economic reform, for peace, and for a revolution that would overturn centuries of inequality, were finally public. And the truth was out. The speech was everything the government and the powers that be had feared. Dr. King's final vision wasn't just about racial equality. It was about challenging the very systems of power that had kept the country divided for so long. He spoke of the brutal economic inequalities that plagued poor black and white communities alike. He spoke of a revolution that would dismantle the military-industrial complex and invest in people instead of profit. He spoke of the urgent need for peace abroad and at home. And in that speech, King had made it clear that his fight was far from over, that the real battle for justice would only intensify in the coming years. As the articles continued to spread, Mariah's phone rang incessantly. News outlets were calling for interviews. Politicians were making statements, some praising King's legacy, others condemning the speech as a dangerous call for revolution. But no matter what they said, one thing was clear. The speech had shattered the carefully constructed narrative of Dr. King's life and legacy. The man they had portrayed as a symbol of peaceful resistance had been much more. He had been preparing to lead a movement that would take on not just racism, but the entire system of inequality. Hours later, Mariah sat with Samuel in a dimly lit room, their phones buzzing nonstop. The speech was now global news. The conversation had shifted. People were waking up to the fact that Dr. King had been about to challenge the very foundations of their society. There was no turning back now, but there was a price. The phone calls started to shift in tone. Anonymous threats began flooding in. Some were from familiar voices, others from new, unseen forces. But the message was always the same. Stop, or else. Mariah didn't flinch. She knew the stakes. She had known them from the moment she had picked up the first piece of Dr. King's lost speech. Now it was out there. The world had seen the truth. What happens now? Samuel asked, his voice a mixture of resolve and fear. We keep going, Mariah said, standing up and looking out the window at the city below. We make sure they can't silence us. We take the fight to them, the same way King would have. We don't back down. Not now. Not ever. The fight had only just begun. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. The speech had sparked a national conversation, but it had also drawn the attention of powerful, dangerous people. Investigations were launched, protests erupted in cities across the country, and calls for systemic change grew louder. But Mariah knew that there was still more to uncover, more hidden truths that had yet to be revealed. She would continue to fight, continue to expose the forces that had conspired to silence Dr. King. She had the truth now, and she wasn't going to stop until the world saw it too. The weeks following the release of Dr. King's lost speech were a whirlwind of public upheaval, political maneuvering, and personal danger. The speech had ignited something that was always there, a dormant desire for systemic change that had been buried beneath layers of complacency. The calls for justice were no longer theoretical. They were practical and urgent, coming from every corner of the nation. For Mariah, it felt like a moment of reckoning. She had become both a symbol and a target, an embodiment of the truth that so many had worked so hard to suppress. The media was relentless in its coverage, painting her as a whistleblower and a hero, while others labeled her a traitor or a pawn in a larger conspiracy. Her every move was scrutinized. The team that had helped distribute the speech was now on the front lines, constantly moving to avoid detection. Samuel had gone underground for his own safety, too, leaving Mariah to carry the torch. She had become the face of the movement, and she understood the weight of that responsibility. But even as the spotlight grew brighter, the danger grew sharper. The calls were relentless, the threats more explicit. People she trusted began to question her methods, and the pressure of the situation began to mount. Mariah knew that exposing the speech was only the beginning. She had started a conversation that could never be shut down, but the forces at play would not relent. The government, private industries, and the networks of power that had protected their interests for so long would not allow the momentum to continue without pushing back. Mariah had been up for hours, her mind spinning with 1,000 different pieces of information. She had spent the past few days interviewing activists, documenting protests, and making sure that the narrative around the speech remained focused on its true power, Dr. King's radical vision for an equitable society. But as much as she had pushed to keep the momentum alive, the attacks were coming faster now. Smear campaigns, social media misinformation, and even targeted attacks on activists who had supported the release of the speech were becoming more common. She was sitting in the makeshift office of a safe house, her fingers flying over her laptop as she reviewed the latest information. There were whispers of government-backed investigations into the leak of the speech, with people suggesting that it had been an orchestrated attack on the current administration. Mariah didn't buy into it, but the damage was done. The speech was too powerful for them to ignore, and that made it dangerous. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. The message was from Elena, the journalist who had played a critical role in the initial release. The urgency in her words was clear. Meet me ASAP. Big news. Someone's talking, and they want you to be there. Mariah hesitated. She knew what it meant when someone said big news. It usually meant trouble. But she had no choice. She couldn't afford to let anything slide. The truth needed to stay in the public eye. She grabbed her coat and headed out into the cold night. The meeting place was an unmarked building near the docks, away from the usual areas of the city that were being closely monitored. Mariah had a sinking feeling as she entered the building and made her way through the dark, narrow hallways. She had learned to trust her instincts, and right now, they were screaming that something was wrong. Elena was waiting for her in a small, dimly lit room. Her face was pale, and there was a nervous energy about her. She didn't even have to speak for Mariah to know that this wasn't just about the speech anymore. "I've got a lead," Elena said, her voice tense. "But it's dangerous. You need to know what you're getting into before you take the next step." Mariah crossed her arms, her expression hardening. "What is it? Someone in the government? Someone high up? They've been trying to shut down all the talk about the speech. And they've got a lot of information that could bury the whole thing. If they want to, they could make it disappear, just like they did with King." Mariah froze. The words hit her like a physical blow. She'd known they would stop at nothing, but hearing it spoken aloud was a whole different level of reality. "Who's talking? Who's behind this?" Elena hesitated, then spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's someone inside the agency, someone who's been leaking information for months. They want to expose the cover-up, but they're scared. They want to meet with you." Mariah didn't need to be told twice. She had always known that there were people inside the system who knew the truth. The problem was that they were just as vulnerable as anyone else. People were disappearing, turning up dead, or being silenced in ways that were too neat to be accidental. The weight of it all pressed down on her chest, but she couldn't turn away. "When do I meet them?" Mariah asked. Elena handed her a piece of paper with an address. "They'll be waiting. But Mariah, you need to be careful. This person could be your biggest ally, or they could be setting you up. You don't know who to trust anymore." Mariah looked at the address, her fingers gripping the paper until it almost tore. "I don't have a choice. I have to go." The meeting place was an abandoned office building on the outskirts of the city, a place that felt like it had been forgotten by time. Mariah entered cautiously, every instinct on high alert. The man waiting for her was older, his hair graying at the temples, his suit rumpled as though he hadn't cared about appearances in years. He stood up when she entered, his eyes scanning the room as though expecting someone else to appear at any moment. "You're the journalist," he said, his voice low and rough. Mariah nodded. "I'm here to listen. You've got information about the cover-up?" The man's eyes flickered with a mix of fear and determination. "I've been in the system for over 20 years. I know how they operate. I know how they erased King's legacy. And I know what's happening now. The speech, it's just the beginning. They won't stop until they bury everything." Mariah leaned in, her heart pounding. "What do you know? What are they planning?" He paused, glancing over his shoulder. "They're moving quickly. The same people who killed King, who erased his final message, are still in power. They've got a network in place to control the media, to suppress any voice that threatens the status quo. And now, they're working to discredit you, to make you look like a puppet or a lunatic. They'll turn the speech against you, make it seem like a threat to national security. The media will fall in line, and it'll all be over." Mariah's mind raced. She had suspected as much. They would try to twist the narrative, just as they always had. But they had underestimated one thing. The people were awake. The movement was growing, and the demand for accountability was only getting louder. "And what can we do about it?" Mariah asked. The man reached into his coat and pulled out a thick envelope. "This. Everything you need to take them down. The files on who was behind the cover-up, the connections between the government and the corporations that benefited from King's assassination. You need to get this to the right people. People who won't back down." Mariah took the envelope, her hands trembling. She knew this was it, the final piece of the puzzle. She had the truth. She had the names, the connections, the proof that could bring the entire system crashing down. But there was no going back now. The stakes were higher than ever. The shadowy figures who had orchestrated Dr. King's assassination and the cover-up that had followed would do anything to keep this truth from coming to light. Mariah slipped the envelope into her coat pocket and turned to leave. "Be careful," the man warned. "You're going to need all the allies you can get. There are too many people watching you now. They won't stop." Mariah nodded. "Neither will I." As she stepped out into the cold night, she knew one thing for certain. The fight was far from over. The speech, the cover-up, the corruption, it was all connected. And she would expose it, one way or another.